My dad looked me dead in the eye on Christmas and said, "Everything was peaceful until you showed up." My 7-year-old just lowered his head, silent and hurt, so I whispered, "Then my money's leaving with me." Suddenly my dad started begging, eyes wide and voice shaking, "Please don't do this." I walked through my father's front door in Joliet, Illinois, with my kids still brushing snow off their jackets, their cheeks flushed from the cold. The house smelled like pine and cinnamon. My stepmother always went overboard, but the warmth in the air didn't match the expression on my dad's face. He stood by the tree, arms crossed, jaw tight, like I'd interrupted a meeting I wasn't supposed to know about. My daughter ran ahead, excited to show him the paper ornaments she'd made at school. My son, who's 7 and quieter, stayed close to me. He always does when we're here. I tried to pretend it would be different this time, that maybe Christmas could be civil. Hope is a stupid thing like that, keeps coming back even when experience tells you it shouldn't. I barely got 2 steps into the living room before my dad said it. Not even a hello, not even a look at the kids. Everything was peaceful until you showed up. It was the way he said peaceful that made the room shrink, like he wasn't talking about noise or chaos, like he meant contaminated, like we were something tracked in on the bottom of a boot. My son's head dropped instantly. His small hand tightened around mine. He didn't say anything. He never does when my dad gets like this. But I felt the sting go straight through him. My daughter stopped mid-step and looked back at me, waiting to see if she should keep pretending this was a normal holiday or if she should brace herself. I kissed my son's hair and kept my voice steady. "Then my money's leaving with me." I didn't raise my tone. I didn't swear. I didn't flinch. I just said it in a way that made my dad's eyes narrow, like he was trying to calculate what I meant. Because he understood, immediately, that I wasn't talking about the $20 Secret Santa gifts. I meant the envelope I brought every Christmas for him and my stepmother. Money I'd saved, money I really didn't have to spare, money he'd come to expect as though it were a tradition written in stone. Around us, conversations died. My 2 brothers stood frozen by the dining table. My stepmother held a tray of deviled eggs, her expression stuck somewhere between annoyance and fear. My dad's face went red in that slow, creeping way that always meant a storm was coming. But I didn't move. I didn't apologize. I didn't take back a single word. My dad stepped closer. "You're not going to pull that crap in my house," he spat, voice low but shaking with restrained anger. He looked over my shoulder at my kids like they somehow justified his disgust. "This is why your life is a mess. You ruin every room you walk into." My son flinched this time. My daughter's eyes went wet. I felt something in me lock into place, something that had been loose, rattling around for years. I slipped my keys back into my coat pocket and said firmly, "Get your boots on." My dad opened his mouth again, ready to unleash something uglier, but my stepmother stepped forward, whispering sharply, "Stop." Not in front of the kids. He didn't stop, he never does. But his jaw clicked shut long enough for me to start ushering my children toward the door. And that's when it finally hit him, what I'd said, what I was taking with me. 5 minutes later, just as I got my daughter's boots zipped and my son's scarf wrapped, my dad came after me into the foyer. But he wasn't yelling anymore. He wasn't sneering. He wasn't even standing tall. He was begging. "Wait. Please just wait, don't leave. We can talk, just don't go, not today." I stared at him, stunned, not because he wanted me to stay, but because of the desperation in his voice. My dad never begs. Not unless something is very, very wrong. My dad didn't start out as the man who would look at my kids like they were a disruption to his peace. But the shift didn't come out of nowhere either. It happened in pieces, quiet, cutting pieces, over years, until the version of him I grew up with felt like a story I misremembered. The first fracture happened when I was 16. My mom had been gone for 3 years by then, and my dad had started dating my stepmother. At first, she played the part, warm, helpful, hovering in that soft, overly sweet way that made me uncomfortable. But the moment she moved in, her tone changed. She walked around like she'd purchased the house and my dad with it. She'd make comments, always when he wasn't around. "You know he worries about you turning out like your mother. You're too emotional, he tells me it exhausts him. Your attitude is what pushes him away. If you want his attention, try being easier to love." I was 16, raw, grieving, desperate to hold on to the only parent I had left. So I tried. I tried so hard I scraped my own personality down to bones. But every time she delivered one of those little messages, my dad never corrected her. Sometimes he nodded. Sometimes he didn't even look up from what he was doing. I learned to swallow things younger than any kid should have to. But the real break came later, when I had my son. I was 22, unmarried, working nights at a warehouse in Crest Hill. His father left before the due date. I remember calling my dad from the hospital, holding this tiny person in my arms, telling him he had a grandson. He didn't visit. He didn't send flowers. He didn't even call back until 3 days later. When he finally saw my son, the only thing he said was, "Hope you're ready. Kids make life harder." It carved something deep into me, because I was ready. I'd built my life around making things work for that baby. But in his eyes, I'd become a burden simply by having a child. Still, I kept trying. Every birthday, every holiday, I brought the kids over. I'd watch my brothers' families get praised for the smallest accomplishments while mine sat on the sidelines, quiet, invisible. My dad always had a reason why he couldn't attend my son's baseball games or my daughter's choir performances. Too tired, too busy, not my thing. But he always had time for my brother's kids. Always. The one that stung the most happened last Christmas. We'd barely stepped inside before my stepmother whispered to him, loud enough for me to hear, "Don't let her dump her problems on us this year." I hadn't asked for a damn thing. I'd brought food. I'd brought gifts. I'd brought that stupid envelope with the money I couldn't afford because somewhere deep in me was still that 16-year-old trying to earn her dad's approval. And he let her say it. He didn't defend me. He didn't look my way. My kids noticed. They always notice. So when he said this year that everything had been peaceful until I showed up, it wasn't a surprise. Not really. It was just the first time he said it out loud, without dressing it up or pretending he meant something else. But the part that mattered, the part that made the air change, made the blood drain from his face, made him follow me into the foyer with desperation instead of anger, had nothing to do with love or regret. It had everything to do with why he needed me there today. And I didn't know it yet, but the truth was about to hit just as hard as the words he'd thrown at my son. When my dad followed me into the foyer that afternoon, the desperation in his voice didn't match anything I'd ever seen from him. It rattled something in me, but not enough to stop me from zipping my daughter's coat. I'd spent years folding myself down to keep the peace. Years absorbing comments, years pretending my kids didn't notice the imbalance in how their grandfather treated them. But the moment he humiliated my son, something inside me finally stopped bending. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't even look at him when he said, "Please, just wait." I just kept tying my son's boots, steady and slow, like the room wasn't full of people pretending not to stare. My heart was pounding, but there was a clarity underneath it I hadn't felt in a long time. I'd reached the point where the pain didn't shrink me anymore, it focused me. My dad hovered behind me, breathing tight. "We can talk about this, don't make a scene." That line, the one he'd used on me since I was a teenager, rang in my ears. Don't make a scene, don't embarrass me, don't act like a problem. But I didn't feel like the problem right then. I felt like the only adult in the room. The truth is, the past year had changed me more than he realized. I'd left the warehouse job and taken a bookkeeping course online. I'd picked up clients in downtown Joliet, small businesses, mostly, until I had enough work to quit night shifts entirely. Money was still tight, but for the first time in my life, I wasn't waiting for someone else to bail me out or validate me. I was building something for myself and my kids, even if the foundation felt uneven and fragile. And I had learned, in the process, to stop mistaking survival for weakness. But the real emotional transformation started the night my son came home from school in September, fists balled, trying not to cry. He'd gotten into an argument with a classmate who bragged about their fun weekend with their grandparents. My son had whispered, not to me, but to himself when he thought I wasn't listening, "Grandpa doesn't like us." It broke something in me, and I knew I couldn't keep pretending my kids were unaffected, so I began pulling back. Fewer visits, fewer calls, more boundaries. My brothers noticed. My stepmother complained. My dad acted offended, but not enough to actually ask why. Until now, until today. Until he realized I wasn't just walking out, I was taking the envelope he depended on. That envelope wasn't charity. It wasn't tradition. It was a habit I'd formed out of guilt when I started earning a little more. It made him treat me like I had something to offer that was worth tolerating. I didn't know how deep that dependence ran, but his panic told me enough. As I stood in his foyer, I realized something else. Leaving wasn't the end of the problem. It was the beginning. Because the more he begged, the more the room seemed to shift. My brothers exchanged glances, not worried about me or the kids, but worried about why he was acting like that. My stepmother stepped forward like she wanted to intervene, then stopped, eyes darting to my dad with her lips pressed tight. Something was wrong. Not emotionally wrong, logistically wrong. Something they hadn't told me. Something they needed me for. But I finished bundling the kids anyway. I opened the front door and let the cold air pour in, a clean slap against the suffocating tension inside. My dad's voice cracked behind me. "If you walk out now, you're going to make things worse, for all of us." I froze, not because I cared about his warning, but because he'd finally said the quiet part out loud. Whatever was coming wasn't just family drama. It was something they'd been hiding from me, and it was about to surface. I kept one hand on the open door, the cold rushing in around my legs, the kids already stepping onto the porch. I was seconds from ending the entire scene when my dad said it again, quieter this time, strained like he was pulling the words through gritted teeth. "You're going to make things worse, for all of us." The phrasing was wrong. It wasn't guilt. It wasn't manipulation. It was fear. I turned back. "Worse for who?" He hesitated, and in that hesitation I felt the shift. My brothers were suddenly alert, like I'd stepped too close to something they'd taped together in the dark. My stepmother set her glass down on the console table with a sharp click, her mouth flattening into a thin line. My dad swallowed. His eyes darted toward the living room, where the rest of the family was pretending not to listen. Then back to me. "This isn't the day for this conversation," he said. "Just stay, we'll talk later." "No," I said. "If you want me to stay, you tell me now. What am I making worse?" My daughter tugged on my sleeve. My son stood silently behind me, watching my dad like he didn't trust him, something no 7-year-old should ever have to feel about a grandparent. That alone gave me the resolve to stay rooted. My dad finally exhaled, long and shaky. "Fine," he said. "You want the truth? We need your help, financially. Things have changed since the summer." There it was, a crack, but not the whole thing. I could see it in the way my stepmother stiffened. "What changed?" I asked. My dad opened his mouth, closed it again, then rubbed his face with both hands. He looked older than he had an hour ago, tired, frayed around the edges, like gravity itself had gotten heavier. He didn't look at me when he said it. "The house is in pre-foreclosure." For a second I didn't move. I didn't breathe. My brothers looked away. My stepmother crossed her arms like she'd been exposed. "What?" I asked, voice low. "We got behind," my dad said. "A few missed payments turned into more. The bank filed the notice last month." He paused, swallowing hard. "We were going to tell you, after Christmas. We just needed your usual contribution today to—" I felt the words like a blow. They needed my envelope. Not as a tradition, not as a gesture, as a lifeline. "How far behind?" I asked. He didn't answer. "How far?" I repeated, sharper. My stepmother snapped. 5 months. Are you happy now?" 5 months. I stared at my dad. "And you were depending on my money to fix that?" He winced. "It would have helped us get current enough to negotiate." "Negotiate what?" He looked at my daughter standing behind me and seemed ashamed for the first time in his life. "To delay the sale." Heat rose into my face, not anger, clarity. They didn't invite me here for family. They didn't endure my presence. They tolerated me because they needed me financially. They needed the daughter they belittled to bail them out of a 5-month disaster. And suddenly, every cold shoulder, every ignored birthday, every whispered comment from my stepmother snapped into focus. I wasn't a daughter in this house. I was a resource, a silent one, a dependable one. My dad stepped forward, voice breaking. "If you leave with that money, we could lose the house." I stared at him, this man who once told me becoming a mother made my life messy, who ignored my son's existence for months, who treated my kids like burdens. "You looked at my child," I said quietly, "and told him his presence ruined your peace." He closed his eyes, chest rising and falling. "And now you want his mother to save your home?" He didn't answer, but he didn't have to. The truth was wide open now, exposed and trembling in the doorway with us. I wasn't walking into a Christmas gathering. I had walked into a crisis they were hiding, and I was the missing piece of their plan. And that was only the beginning. My kids were already outside on the porch, shuffling in the snow, waiting for me to decide whether we were walking away or stepping back into the mess. I kept my hand on the door frame, cold air pouring past me, my dad still standing there like he expected his confession alone to rewind everything he'd said earlier, everything he'd done for years. But I didn't feel shock anymore, or confusion, or even betrayal. I felt something steadier, a cold, quiet focus. "You were going to ask me for thousands of dollars today," I said, "right after telling my son he ruined your peace." My dad's mouth twitched like he wanted to deny it, but even he knew that was useless. I stepped back inside just long enough to close the door so the kids wouldn't hear what came next. My daughter's small hand pressed against the glass from the outside. I gave her a nod, 1 minute, and she relaxed. I turned back to them. My brothers stood behind my dad now, both with expressions I'd never seen on their faces. Trapped. Not guilty, not ashamed, trapped. My stepmother hovered near the staircase, biting her thumbnail hard enough to leave a mark. Suddenly it was obvious they'd been carrying this secret together, trying to outrun it, and I was the emergency exit. "You weren't just hoping for my help," I said slowly. "You were counting on it." No one spoke. "Tell me the whole situation," my stepmother finally snapped. "We don't owe you every detail." "Yes," I said, turning toward her, "you do." Her mouth shut. My dad ran a trembling hand through his hair. "We took out a HELOC last year. Costs ran higher than expected. Some medical bills, then your stepmother's hours were cut. We fell behind." HELOC, medical bills, reduced hours. All real possibilities, none of which explained the raw panic on their faces now. "How much do you owe?" I asked. My brother Mike shifted uneasily. My other brother, Aaron, stared hard at the floor. My dad didn't answer. I'd learned enough from bookkeeping. When people avoid numbers, the numbers are bad. "All of you expected me to bring money today," I said. "How much were you counting on?" My dad's jaw tightened. "Enough to show good faith to the bank. To buy time." But that wasn't right. A bank doesn't care about good faith. They care about concrete payments. They needed a lump sum, a big one. And suddenly I had my first clear picture of what they wanted from me. Not tradition, not support, a bailout. And something else. Because my brothers were still too tense, too pale. There was more they weren't saying. I stepped farther into the foyer, tapping into the backbone I'd built this past year, the spine I'd forged from every insult, every dismissal, every cold shoulder. I let my voice drop, controlled and level. "You all treated me like an outsider for years. You treated my kids worse, but behind the scenes, you were relying on me." "We weren't relying," my stepmother began. "You were," I said, "and you planned around it. You planned around me." The silence that followed was confirmation enough, so I made a decision. I wasn't going to scream. I wasn't going to storm. I wasn't going to crumble. I was going to dissect this. Carefully, ruthlessly. "Here are the rules if you expect me to talk about helping," I said. 1. You speak to my kids with respect starting immediately. 2. You stop hiding the actual numbers. 3. I get every piece of information directly from the bank, not filtered through you. My dad blinked, taken aback. My stepmother's face hardened with resentment. But my brothers, the ones who'd been silent until now, exhaled in a way that told me they hadn't expected me to be the one who pushed this thing into daylight. My dad finally nodded once, slow and defeated. "Fine, you want the truth, you get it." Good, because I needed the truth to destroy the illusion they'd built. And I didn't know it then, but what I was about to uncover, the missing pieces they were still hiding, would flip the entire situation on its head. My dad's agreement, "Fine, you want the truth, you get it," should have felt like a victory. But the way my brothers exchanged a look, a long, heavy one, made something in my stomach drop. It wasn't just dread. It was awareness. They weren't relieved I'd pushed for honesty. They were terrified of it. "Sit down," my dad muttered, rubbing the back of his neck. His voice had changed, lower, resigned, like he was finally accepting something he'd tried to avoid. But I didn't move. I stayed standing in the foyer with my coat still zipped, ready to walk right back out if they tried to turn this into another emotional ambush. "I'm fine here," I said. My stepmother crossed her arms in a defensive knot. My brothers hovered near the dining room doorway like they were waiting for an impact they'd seen coming long before I arrived. My dad took a breath that rattled. "The house is 5 months behind, that's true," he hesitated. "But it isn't just the mortgage." There it was, another crack. "What else?" I asked. He looked at my stepmother, she looked at the floor. The HELOC, he said quietly. It's maxed out. I didn't flinch. If anything, that was predictable. Desperation tends to snowball, but my brothers didn't move. They didn't even look surprised. They were bracing for the real hit. What else? I repeated. My dad's throat bobbed. He opened his mouth, but Aaron's soft-spoken, nervous, usually the peacekeeper, stepped in. Dad, he whispered, you have to tell her. Tell me what? My dad pressed his palms against the wall like he needed it to stay upright. It wasn't the medical bills, he finally said. My stepmother hissed, you don't have to. Yes, he cut her off, voice breaking, I do. She needs to know why we need the money today. His eyes lifted to mine, red-rimmed, panicked, pleading for forgiveness he hadn't earned. The HELOC wasn't spent on emergencies, he said. It was spent on an investment. A business? My pulse picked up. What business? He shut his eyes as if saying it out loud might kill him. Your brother's business, he whispered. Mike's. I stared at Mike. He wouldn't meet my eyes. What business? I asked again. My dad swallowed hard. A trucking startup. He needed capital, a lot of it. We thought we'd see returns quickly. We thought the property value would keep going up. We thought, he stopped, voice collapsing under the weight of all the wrong assumptions. Dad costing the equipment loans, Aaron added quietly. All of them. When the contracts didn't come through, everything fell apart. I felt my head tilt slowly, like my body was trying to process the information at a different speed than my mind. You put the house up, I said, for a business. My dad didn't answer. You risked everything, I continued, for him, and then you planned to use my money to cover the fallout. Still nothing, just silence and shame. But the real blow didn't land until Mike finally spoke, his voice flat, defeated. I told them you'd help, he said. I told them you always cover things, you always show up with money at Christmas. They counted on it. The room swayed for half a second, not literally, just emotionally, because that sentence wasn't about finances. It was about identity. In this family, I wasn't the forgotten daughter. I wasn't the one whose kids were treated like afterthoughts. I wasn't the outsider. I was the safety net, the fallback plan, the person they assumed would sacrifice everything without asking questions. But the twist wasn't that they'd misuse the money. It was that everybody in the house, my dad, my stepmother, my brothers, had built their survival around me, quietly, privately, systematically, and then treated me like I was the disturbance. The shame, the chaos, the one who ruined their peace. And suddenly I understood the deeper truth. They didn't want me here today. They needed me here. And if I walked out now, they wouldn't just be losing the house. They'd be losing the entire plan they built behind my back. For a long moment, nobody moved. Not my dad, not my brothers, not my stepmother, who now hovered near the staircase like she was guarding the banister from collapsing under the weight of the truth. I could hear the faint sound of my kids, shifting their boots outside on the porch, little thumps against the wood, unaware of the tectonic plates shifting under their family tree. I stared at the three of them, the men who shared my last name, the woman who had spent years whispering poison into my father's ear, and something settled deep inside me. The anger wasn't loud anymore. It wasn't wild. It was controlled, like a blade that had been sharpened to a calm, steady edge. You talked about me, I said quietly. Privately, you planned around what I'd bring, but you never once treated me like I mattered unless you needed something. No one argued. Good, because the next part wasn't going to spare any of us. Tell me why, I said. Tell me why you thought you could depend on me, why you assumed I'd bail you out, why you believed I owed you anything. My dad's mouth tightened. This isn't about— No, I cut in. It is. And you're going to give me the real reason, not the surface excuse, not the we're family line. The reason you held me at arm's length for years and still expected me to be the one who saved you. My brothers shifted, both of them staring at him now. They wanted him to say it. They needed him to say it. So did I. My dad finally sat down on the bottom step, elbows on his knees, as if the confession physically weighed him down. When he finally spoke, his voice wasn't angry or defensive. It was something worse, unfiltered truth. Because you're the one who needs us, he said. It hit me square in the chest, not because it was true, but because he believed it, deeply, with the confidence of a man who'd rehearsed it long enough to mistake it for fact. You've always needed us, he continued. Neediness follows you. Chaos follows you. You break things without trying. You bring trouble, you attract it, you create it. Your mother was the same way. There it was, the rot underneath everything. He leaned back, voice growing steadier as he fell into the belief that shaped how he'd treated me for years. You show up with drama, with problems, with emotional weight. You drain people, you always have. Your brothers, they have stable lives. They don't cause issues. They don't ask for anything. But you, he shook his head slowly. You needed us. You depended on us. I felt a coldness work its way up my spine. That's not true, I said, but he held up a hand. It is, he insisted. You needed a place to stay after the baby. You needed help with bills years ago. You needed rides. You needed someone to fix things when your life got messy. My jaw tightened. And because you needed us, he said, we assumed you understood the arrangement. You lean on us when things go wrong. And when we need help, you give back. It stays balanced that way. Balanced. That word twisted inside me. My brothers stared at the floor. My stepmother watched me with an expression that bordered on triumph, like she'd been waiting decades for my father to say it plainly. Dad, I said, voice steady but cold, I haven't asked you for anything in 7 years. He waved that away. Problems follow you. Even when you don't ask for help, you bring tension. And today, he gestured toward my son's boots outside. Today you walked in already bringing your stress. Your kids bring stress. It was quiet, dead quiet. And then the final piece landed, the part I hadn't anticipated. I assumed you'd help us because in this family, you're the one who owes. Your mistakes, your needs, they put us through enough. This is how it evens out. There it was, the villain's reason, not greed, not desperation, not entitlement. A belief so deeply rooted it had become their operating system. I was a burden. Therefore, I was obligated. Therefore, anything I gave was not generosity, it was repayment. And in their eyes, the debt would never be settled. I owe you, I repeated. My dad nodded once, firm, certain. Yes, you owe us. Something inside me clicked into place, final, irreversible. Then I opened the door. The cold air rushed back in as I opened the door, snow prickling at my cheeks. My daughter looked up from where she was tracing lines in the frost on the railing. My son stood beside her, bundled tight, watching me the way kids do when they know the adults behind the door aren't just arguing, they're revealing something dark. I stepped onto the porch and knelt in front of them. We're leaving, I said softly. Right now, my son nodded. My daughter slipped her hand into mine instantly. No hesitation, no fear, just trust. Behind me, my dad's voice rose from the foyer, sharp with panic. Don't walk out that door with that money. You hear me? You do not leave this house. I turned, but I didn't step back inside. I stayed on the porch, framed by the doorway. You're never talking to me like that again, I said. And you're never talking to my kids like that again. His face shifted, fear, then entitlement, then indignation. You think you get to walk away from this? You think you get to abandon your family when we need you? You abandoned me a long time ago, I said. You just didn't expect to need the person you pushed out. I watched that hit him, really hit him. He stepped toward me. You owe us. And there it was, the anchor, the lie he'd been feeding himself for years, handed to me like it was fact. No, I said, I don't. I reached into my coat, pulled out the envelope he'd been eyeing since I walked in, and held it in my hand. For a second, everyone inside froze, my brothers, my stepmother, my dad most of all. The room didn't breathe. They thought I was going to hand it over. Instead, I tore it straight down the middle, then again, and again. Small pieces of paper drifting into the snow at my feet. My dad lunged forward like he could stop it, grabbing at the air. What the hell are you doing? I didn't raise my voice. Ending the balance sheet you invented. My stepmother gasped like I'd stabbed her. My brothers just stared, stunned, maybe realizing for the first time that their quiet scapegoat actually had teeth. Then I delivered the part they weren't prepared for. I called the bank this morning, I said. Before we even got here. My dad's face went blank. What? Why? Because you've been dodging my calls for 3 weeks, I said. Because Aaron sounded scared on Thanksgiving. Because the mail at your house has been piling up. Because when people are hiding something, they get sloppy. I took out my phone. And because I already knew the house was in pre-foreclosure. My stepmother's hand flew to her mouth. My brothers straightened, stunned into silence. My dad stumbled back a step. Why didn't you say anything? Because I wanted to hear what story you'd tell, I said. I wanted to see whether you'd treat me like a daughter or a wallet. I looked directly at him. You chose the wallet. Then I delivered the real strike. I spoke with the bank's loss mitigation department. The only reason the house hasn't been scheduled for auction yet is because someone, I paused, filed an anonymous hardship extension on your behalf with documentation. My dad blinked fast. So someone helped us? Yes, I said. Someone did, my stepmother whispered. Who? I let the silence stretch until it broke. Me. Shock rippled through the doorway. My brothers exchanged stunned looks. My stepmother's face twisted. My dad reached for words that wouldn't come. I tried to help quietly, I said. I tried to give you space to tell the truth, but you turned me into a burden in your mind so you'd never have to feel grateful. My dad took another shaky step toward me. Then why are you leaving now? Why are you doing this? Because today, I said, you looked at my child and told him the world was safer without him. And the moment you did that, any obligation I thought I had to you died. He opened his mouth, pleading, furious, lost, but I shook my head. I'll keep the extension in place. But that's all. I won't let the bank throw you out in the snow. But the rest, the loans, the foreclosure, the fallout, you handle it without me, without my money. Without my silence. My stepmother sank onto the stairs. My brothers avoided my eyes. My dad reached for the doorframe like the house itself was tilting. I took my kids' hands, stepped off the porch, and walked toward the car through the quiet snowfall. Behind me, my dad called my name. Once, then again. His voice cracking open the way I'd wished it would when I was 16 or 22 or any other year I needed him. But now, it didn't pull me back. My son tightened his grip on my hand. My daughter leaned into my side. And for the first time in years, I didn't feel like the problem. I felt free.